Thank you very much. I must say, first of all, of course, that I must thank the Chaplain General and John for inviting me. As you'll all discover, everybody, am I making a...
now it's better.
Oh, it's good.
What? Am I not on? What's going on? When I was at CBC, am I back on? No, I'm back on. It's, as I said, it's an oxymoron because I really feel comfortable talking to you guys because we all believe the same thing, you know? And it's most of the time I talk to people who, well, they're not as close to Christianity as they should be. So, anyway, I'm going to say a few things about quite a lot of things. First of all, I said, Paul, you're going to go and talk to all these educated people who are out there doing that. What are you going to say to them? Now, it's all very well to talk about the Boer War, which I shall do a bit, but I've written a whole book on it. And so, if you think I'm going to tell you what's in the book, you're mistaken. You guys are going to have to buy the book to find out about the Boer War. So I thought, well, what am I going to actually talk about? Well, I thought, you know, I think probably quite a lot of you write. Of course, you have to write your sermons, and a lot of you probably want to publish books. But I don't think many of you have sort of meet people who are, for example, vote in the Academy Awards as I do. And I've spent 40 years making television drama and motion pictures. So I thought, you know, I think probably that's a bit different for you. It would be a different thing to find out about. And then when I entered what is euphoniously called the golden years, not very golden, we have new hips, new knees, new pacemaker. I have a heart attack every year. I sort of, you know, it's not golden, but when I entered them, well, I was 60 or some odd, I had open heart surgery. That's like 25 years ago. A quadruple bypass. And Joan said, Paul, you've always wanted to be a writer. When I left Oxford, my whole aim was to be a poet. And so I decided I would write poetry, which didn't last very long because then I got this job on CBC as a director, and I started out in the golden years of Canadian television. I want to tell you a little something about that because as you probably know, or maybe you don't know, the CBC is under tremendous attack from the Harper government, and of course, because I'll probably never see any of you again, I'm allowed to say whatever I want. I'm going to tell you, we need our CBC. Yes. Thank you very much. It's, so let me tell you, you know, in what they call the golden years, we brought, I felt it was my, I should throw in that after 3 or 4 years there, I was awarded, long before a lot of your parents were born, I won the award for the best director in Canadian television. That was about 55 or 56, I think. And I wanted to bring the best playwrights to Canada for people to see. So I did the first Harold Pinter play, I did Ennui, I did Giraudoux. I mean, we all were doing great classical plays that Canadians could see. Of course, it doesn't happen now, but if the CBC got stronger, perhaps it would. Of course, the bureaucracy, you guys all know how bureaucracy builds, because Uncle Jack, when he went over on the Boer War, there were 3 chaplains, and that was it for 1,000 guys. And they nearly didn't have an Anglican chaplain. I'll tell you a bit about that in a moment. So one of the things you should know is that in the 50s and 60s, the CBC had a religious department. And so they did religious plays at Christmas and at Easter, and I was one of the mainstay people because I was one of the rare people who was kind of committed to Christianity. So in the end, for example, one day, Reverend Brian Freeland, who is like 85, still practicing at St. Thomas's Church, still alive, going strong. Brian came in one day and said, "Paul, we need something for this Easter." And I said, "Yeah, what'll we do?" He said, "Well, why don't you write something?" Yeah, and I loved writing, of course, but you know, I wasn't that good at it. So I did end up writing a play called The Hill, which was about the ascent of our Lord going up the hill, and told in verse, and it was all live television in those days, live television. And it seemed to do so well that it won all sorts of awards. So then the BBC brought me over to do it, a religious play. And I must tell you that in England, unlike today, the poor newspapers are all going under. In those days, there was a television critic in every little village in England and city. In those days, for example, I brought a young Scots actor over who'd never played in North America, called Sean Connery, and I did Macbeth with him. And how did that happen? Well, Bob said, "Paul, I think we should do another Shakespeare play." And I said, "Okay, what do you want to do?" And he said, "Well, they're studying Macbeth at the moment, this year in schools." I said, "Okay, I'll do Macbeth." I mean, that's how simple it was. It wasn't like this and committees and no. So that was So then, anyway, I went on, and then I guess as when I'd done enough of all that and the stress of raising money and doing films, I had my open heart surgery, and so I was. Joan said, I said, "Oh my God, I don't know how will I get this next film on." Joan said, "Paul, you said you wanted to write when you were in your 80s. And I said, "Yes," she said, "You're not going to make the 80s. You stop now and start." And I said, "Oh, great." So I started writing. Now, just in case you're interested, I wrote a lot of screenplays, but novels, I thought, well, you know, screenplays are complex. They're very difficult to write, and maybe novels are. So I went and studied novel writing at UCLA. UCLA is packed with wannabe writers, as I was. So, I mean, UCLA is, I think you get most of its money from people who flock to LA and want to learn how to be writers. So there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of wannabe writers. So I was one of them. And I went there for 2 or 3 years and picked up a few things. And then I found out, now what's interesting is that then I found there's a, I live in Shigawak. Now, Shigawak is about 100 people over about 8 miles of coastline. And as a lot of you, I'm quite sure, come from small villages, the oral tradition in our countryside is very strong. And there was an oral tradition in Shigawak that the first Almond had jumped off a battleship. So that's kind of interesting. And it was when there was nobody on the Gaspé Coast at this particular place, Port Daniel in Shigawak. It's near Passquabiac, near New Carlisle, somebody may have heard of. So I went to the county seat, which is New Carlisle, and I said, "Do you have any," oh dear, excuse me, I would like to cough. They said, I said, "Do you have any old documents?" No, we don't have old. "No, come along, there must be something." I said, no, well, go down under, in the basement, there's a hat rack, and under it, I think there's some old cardboard boxes. I said, okay, so down I went. My cousin Ted Wright, who is a big researcher, and he helps me with everything. So we brought the box up, and we opened it, and there was the original document from 1816. Now, there was a big famine in Canada, all around the world. It snowed in Quebec City, 1816. One of the volcanoes, which of course I knew, a dozen years ago when I wrote the first book, The Deserter. But I can't tell you where the hell it was. It was off in the Pacific somewhere. And it spread a nuclear winter all across the globe. And so people on the Gaspé coast were starving. And they sent a schooner with what we call barrels of wheat, barrels of flour. And in order to get enough flour to last you through the winter so you could at least stay alive, you had to say who you were married to, what buildings you had, blah, blah, blah. And there was my great-grandfather. And James, his name was Thomas Manning, but he changed it from Thomas Manning to James Alford. Well, I said Alford, it was James Almond, because if you're a deserter from Her Majesty's Navy, I met some Navy guys in Halifax a couple of years ago, and I went over to talk to them because, you know, anything to sell a book or two. So I said my first book is all about the Navy, and if you deserted in those days, you were given 1,000 lashes, 100 on each ship of the line. And after the first 100 or so, you were more or less dead. And they took the meat and they kind of beat it as an example to the other guys. So I said, what happens if you desert? You know, I thought, wonder, they still beat you like that? It's a bit brutal. And they said, no, we have like 2 weeks in jail or something. So I think times have changed, of course. 1800. So anyway, that started the Alford saga. So I did the deserter, then I went around to sell it. So I'd written a book, so I went to Toronto to publishers. I personally hate Toronto, and they equally hate me. All my films in Toronto, I mean, I got rave reviews in New York City and Los Angeles. Boy, but those critics in Toronto have attacked every one of my films mercilessly. So it's kind of funny. However, I went there and I thought, I'll try to get the book. So I went to publishers, because I'm known a bit in those days, and I said, okay, I've written a book about Shigawak. Well, you can imagine where that went. But when I first did my first film for Paramount Pictures in 1967, there was no motion picture industry in Canada at all. So it was not only hard, it's hard to get a film on today. Can you imagine then? No crew, no nothing, and down I went, and I managed to meet, interesting little side facts. Paramount Pictures had just been bought by a guy called Charles Bluedorn, who ran a nuts and bolts company, and he made enough money. He was quite a clever guy. Like a little, what makes Sammy run, bald head with little big black glasses, and he was like, so Charlie had bought Paramount. Paramount was all in a terrible tiz, because what's going to happen? We've been bought. See, today all the studios, as you probably know, are owned by big conglomerates run by committees. But the old moguls in the 50s were still there, so this was the first time it had happened. So somehow I got in to see Charlie, and I told him I want to make a film in Shigawak. So the point is that he gave me the money. Don't tell me how or why. So I thought, well, when I'm selling the book, of course people are going to see, but they didn't. So then I sat down and wrote the second book. Same question. No, nobody wanted to publish it. So then I wrote the third, and I wrote the fourth, and I wrote the fifth, everyone taking a year to write. And the sixth, well, I think when I got around 6 or 7, Jones said, Paul, you know, enough is enough. Go get it. I said, okay. So I went up, and a publisher said they'd publish them all. So that's how that got started. And I should throw in quickly, because I know after this dreadful performance I'll never be invited back. So I want to tell you about the next books. Because after this World War book, the next book in the spring is called The Gunner, and it's about my father, who was in the Canadian artillery and fought through every one of the major battles of World War I. Ypres, Vimy Ridge, Passchendaele, he was through them all. And so you'll really know what it was like in World War I. It was a horrifying book to write. I read, I think I read about 130, 140 books on World War I, but there's none like this. This is written about a soldier. It's actually first person in the artillery. He was on a howitzer battalion, and Major Mark George, so I know somebody's here from Shiloh, he helped me all the way through, because nobody today knows how to fire a howitzer except Mark George. And fortunately I found him, and he told me what they all did, and so I stuck it in the book. And then I think probably the only book that'll get me into that damn Toronto Mafia, get me maybe a prize or two, is the book number 7, which is called The Hero, but its subtitle is Shell Shock, a love story. And it deals with my father, who after World War I had a case of shell shock, and it's a very touching book, and it's helpful, I think, when you're dealing with this modern disease, to see what it was like in the early days. And it's not written by an expert, and it's not academic. It's just, this is how it was. In Canada, we did not have any real culture in any real sense of the word before World War II. Now, I think most of us, even the older people, you kind of have a feeling that it's been, the writers and the dancers and everyone has been here more or less forever. But no, before World War II, there was no professional ballet company, no professional theater, a lot of amateur theater, no professional opera, no indigenous publisher. Macmillan, British, came over and published a bit. So really it all started after World War II. And because I'm so dreadfully old, I was there. And so I was in at the beginning. And my first wife was a principal dancer of the National Ballet. So Celia Franca came over from England and began the National Ballet. And you'll read in that book, that's 2015, 2 more years. So if I'm still here, DV, I'll be, there to publicize it. But it's about those early years of the beginning of Canadian culture. So that's just a little, I thought it would be kind of interesting for you to know that's that. Now I thought what I'd do, because I see the dreadful minute hand sort of speeding around the clock. So thank you very much. Now I'm going to throw it open to questions.